The gunshot echoed through the late afternoon air, startling Lucy Eastman as she fled through the muddy streets of Silver Creek, Montana Territory, in the spring of 1875. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a wild mustang, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she clutched the torn fabric of her once fine dress. Blood trickled from a cut on her cheek where Harrison's ring had struck her, the same ring that was meant to bind them in marriage the following day. Lucy ducked between buildings, her blonde hair falling loose from its pins as she desperately searched for anywhere to hide. The stables at the edge of town beckoned like a sanctuary, and she made for them with the last of her strength. Harrison would be searching for her soon, his rage only intensified by her escape and the public humiliation it would bring him. The stable doors loomed ahead, and Lucy slipped inside, the familiar scent of hay and horses wrapping around her like a comforting blanket. She sank into the shadows behind stacked hay bales, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth to quiet her breathing. The stable was nearly empty, save for a few horses shifting restlessly in their stalls. Outside, men's voices called to one another. Harrison's deep, commanding tone rose above them all. "Find her. That ungrateful woman can't have gone far. $20 to the man who brings her to me." Lucy closed her eyes, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. How had she been so blind? Harrison Blackwell, the wealthiest man in the county, had courted her with such charm and promise. Her father had been delighted at the match, seeing it as the answer to their declining fortunes. But behind closed doors, Harrison had shown his true nature: possessive, controlling, and increasingly violent. The stable doors creaked open and Lucy froze, pressing herself deeper into the shadows. Heavy footsteps approached, and she held her breath, certain that Harrison's men had found her. Instead, a tall figure moved toward the far stall, whistling softly to a nervous horse. "Easy there, Thunder," the man murmured, his voice low and reassuring. Lucy shifted slightly, trying to get a better view when her elbow knocked against a bucket. It clattered to the ground with a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet stable. The man spun around, hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his hip. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice firm but not threatening. Lucy remained silent, paralyzed with fear. "I know someone's hiding," he said, moving cautiously toward her hiding place. "Might as well come out. I don't take kindly to stable thieves." With no escape route and her hiding place discovered, Lucy slowly rose from behind the hay bales, her hands raised. "Please," she whispered, "I'm not stealing anything. I just needed somewhere to hide." The man stopped short at the sight of her bruised face, torn dress, and eyes wild with fear. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly beneath his hat. His eyes, a clear, startling blue, widened with concern. "Madam," he said, immediately lowering his gun, "you're hurt." Lucy swayed slightly on her feet, exhaustion and fear catching up with her. "They're looking for me," she managed to say, her voice barely audible. "He'll kill me if he finds me." The man's expression hardened as he glanced toward the stable doors, where the sounds of the search party were growing closer. Without hesitation, he moved toward her. "Name's Lucas Dawson," he said quickly. "Ranch hand at the M. Can you ride?" Lucy nodded, though in truth, it had been years since she'd been on horseback. "Good," Lucas said, already moving toward a sturdy bay gelding. "We need to get you out of here before they check the stables." As if on cue, Harrison's voice boomed just outside. "Check every building." She couldn't have left town on foot. Lucas cursed under his breath, then made a swift decision. "Change of plans," he whispered, taking Lucy's arm and guiding her toward a ladder in the corner. "Up to the loft, quick." Lucy scrambled up the ladder, ignoring the sting of splinters in her palms. Lucas followed, pulling the ladder up behind them just as the stable doors burst open. From their vantage point in the hayloft, partially concealed by the shadows, they watched as Harrison strode in, flanked by two of his men. "Search every stall," Harrison commanded, his handsome face distorted with rage. "That ungrateful bitch thinks she can humiliate me. I'll teach her what happens to women who don't know their place." Lucy shrank back, and Lucas instinctively placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. His touch was gentle but firm, anchoring her in the moment. The men below searched thoroughly, checking each stall and even poking at some hay bales with pitchforks. Lucy held her breath, certain that at any moment one of them would think to look up. But after several tense minutes, Harrison gave a disgusted grunt. "She's not here. Move on to the freight office." He paused at the door, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "When I find her, and I will find her, she'll wish she'd never been born." The stable doors slammed shut behind them, but Lucas kept Lucy still for several more minutes, listening intently for any sign that someone might have stayed behind. Finally satisfied they were alone, he allowed her to exhale. "Thank you," Lucy whispered, her whole body trembling with delayed shock. Lucas studied her face in the dim light filtering through the loft's small window. The cut on her cheek had stopped bleeding but looked angry and red against her pale skin. "That man, he's the one who did this to you." Lucy nodded, touching her cheek gingerly. "Harrison Blackwell. I'm supposed to marry him tomorrow." Lucas's jaw tightened. "I know of Blackwell. Man's got half the county in his pocket and thinks he owns the other half." He looked at her directly. "I take it the wedding's off." Despite everything, a small, hysterical laugh escaped Lucy's lips. "Yes, I'd say so, though he clearly doesn't agree." "What's your name?" Lucas asked, his voice gentler now. Lucy Eastman." "Well, Miss Eastman, we need to get you somewhere safe. Blackwell isn't the type to give up easily." Lucy's momentary relief faded. "There's nowhere in town I can go. He owns the hotel, has friends at the sheriff's office, and my father—" She trailed off, the pain of betrayal fresh in her heart. "My father arranged the match. He'd just send me right back." Lucas was silent for a moment, weighing their options. "My ranch is a day's ride from here. It's not much, but it's far enough that Blackwell's influence doesn't reach." He looked at her steadily. "You'd be safe there until we figure something more permanent." "Why would you help me?" Lucy asked, suspicion momentarily overriding her desperation. "You don't know me." Lucas's eyes clouded briefly with some old pain. "Let's just say I've seen what men like Blackwell are capable of. I couldn't live with myself if I turned away and later heard." He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. Outside, the sounds of the search were growing more distant as Harrison's men moved farther into town. Lucas moved toward the edge of the loft. "We'll wait until dark," he said, his tone businesslike now. "There's a back way out of the stables that leads straight to the creek. We can follow it a ways before cutting east toward my place." Lucy nodded, though the prospect of fleeing into the wilderness with a stranger brought its own set of fears. But what choice did she have? Stay and become Harrison's property, his punching bag, perhaps eventually his victim. "All right," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'll go with you." Lucas gave her an approving nod, then moved to gather some supplies stashed in the loft, a canteen, some jerky, and a worn but serviceable blanket. "Try to rest if you can," he advised. "We've got a long night ahead." As the afternoon faded into evening, Lucy dozed fitfully among the hay bales, jolting awake at every sound. Lucas kept watch by the small window, his profile sharp against the fading light. There was something reassuring about his calm vigilance, a steadiness that made Lucy believe she might actually escape. When full darkness fell, Lucas gently shook her awake. "Time to go," he whispered. He lowered the ladder and descended first, then helped Lucy down. Her limbs were stiff from tension and the hours spent hiding, but adrenaline kept her moving. Lucas worked quickly, saddling 2 horses, his bay gelding and a smaller, dappled mare. "She's gentle," he assured Lucy, helping her mount. "Just follow my lead and stay close." Lucas led them through the back of the stable, where a small door opened onto a narrow path that wound down to Silver Creek. The night was clear, with a half-moon providing just enough light to see by. Lucy clung to the saddle horn, her body remembering the rhythm of horseback riding even after so many years. They followed the creek for nearly an hour, the water masking the sounds of their horses' hooves. When they finally turned east, heading toward the foothills that marked the beginning of Lucas's ranch, Lucy allowed herself to believe that they might have truly escaped. But fate had other plans. As they crested a small rise, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them, multiple riders coming fast. "Damn it," Lucas muttered. "They must have realized you're gone from town." Lucy's heart sank. "Harrison has men who can track better than bloodhounds. What do we do?" Lucas scanned the terrain, making a quick decision. "There's an old line shack about 2 miles ahead. We might make it before they catch our trail." They urged their horses forward, no longer concerned with stealth but with speed. Lucy bent low over her mare's neck, whispering encouragements as they galloped across the open land. Behind them, the pursuing riders were gaining ground, their shouts carrying on the night air. The line shack appeared just as Lucy's strength was beginning to fail, a small, weathered structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. Lucas dismounted quickly, helping Lucy down before leading both horses behind the shack. "Stay with the horses," he instructed, drawing his pistol. "If anything happens to me, ride northeast. You'll hit the main road to Helena by morning." Before Lucy could protest, Lucas took up position at the corner of the shack, his gun ready. The pursuing riders were close enough now that their lanterns created dancing points of light in the distance. "5 riders," Lucas murmured. "Better odds than I expected." Lucy's hands trembled as she held onto the horse's reins. The mare sensed her fear, shifting nervously. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant to bring this trouble to you." Lucas glanced back at her, his expression softening momentarily. "Not your fault, Miss Eastman. Some men just can't stand to lose what they think belongs to them." The riders approached cautiously, fanning out as they neared the shack. Lucy recognized Harrison's voice, cold and commanding, directing his men. "Dawson," Harrison called out. "I know you're in there with my fiancé. Send her out and we can forget this unfortunate business." Lucas remained silent, his body tense with readiness. "She's my property, Dawson," Harrison continued, his voice taking on an edge of rage. "By law and by agreement with her father, you're nothing but a common thief." At this, Lucas finally responded. "A woman isn't property, Blackwell. And from the looks of her face, the only thief here is the man who stole her dignity." Harrison's laugh was ugly. "Big words from a failed rancher playing cowboy. My men will cut you down before you can blink, and then I'll take back what's mine." Lucy saw Lucas's jaw tighten, but he maintained his position. "You want her, you'll have to go through me." "So be it," Harrison snarled. "Boys, smoke them out." One of the men lit something, a torch or an oil-soaked rag, and prepared to throw it onto the shack's dry wooden roof. In that moment, Lucas made his move, stepping out from cover and firing 2 precise shots. The first hit the torch bearer in the shoulder, sending the flaming brand falling harmlessly to the ground. The second shot took down another of Harrison's men, striking him in the leg. The night erupted into chaos. Harrison and his remaining men returned fire, bullets splintering the wood of the shack. Lucas ducked back into cover, reloading quickly. "When I tell you," he said to Lucy, his voice calm despite the danger, "run for that stand of trees to the east. Take the horses." "I'll cover you." Lucy shook her head fiercely. "I won't leave you here to die for me." Lucas's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "Trust me," he said simply. Before Lucy could argue further, Lucas stepped out again, firing in rapid succession. Two more of Harrison's men fell, wounded but not killed. Harrison himself and the remaining gunmen took cover behind their horses. "Now," Lucas shouted, and Lucy didn't hesitate. She mounted her mare in one fluid motion, grabbed the reins of Lucas's gelding, and spurred toward the trees. Behind her, she heard more gunshots, the angry shout of Harrison's voice, and then, to her immense relief, the sound of Lucas's boots as he ran to catch up. He swung himself onto his horse with the ease of long practice, and they raced together into the shelter of the pines. The pursuit continued, but Harrison and his remaining man were at a disadvantage, now injured, down to two, and unfamiliar with the terrain that Lucas knew like the back of his hand. They rode hard for another hour, following game trails and creek beds, doubling back occasionally to confuse their trail. By the time they emerged onto a ridge overlooking a small valley, there was no sign of pursuit. Lucas finally reined in, listening carefully before allowing himself to relax. "I think we lost them," he said, breathing hard. "For now, at least." Lucy was trembling with exhaustion and delayed fear, but she managed to nod. You could have been killed." Lucas shrugged, though his casual gesture couldn't entirely mask the tension in his shoulders. "Wouldn't be the first time someone's shot at me, though usually it's over cattle rustling accusations, not rescuing damsels." Despite everything, Lucy found herself smiling at his dry humor. "Is that what I am? A damsel?" "In distress, certainly," Lucas replied, his own smile briefly lighting his weathered face, "but with more courage than most men I know." They made camp in a sheltered hollow, Lucas insisting that they keep the fire small and well concealed. As Lucy huddled beneath the blanket he'd given her, watching him tend to the horses with gentle, capable hands, she realized how completely her life had changed in the space of a single day. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Lucas settled beside her, offering her a piece of jerky. "We rest, then continue to my place at first light. It's not far now." And then, Lucas was quiet for a moment, his eyes reflecting the small flames of their fire. "And then, you stay with me," he said simply. "At least until we can figure out someplace safer. Blackwell's reach is long, but not infinite. Stay with me." The words hung in the air between them, carrying a weight beyond their simple meaning. Lucy found herself studying Lucas's face, noting the small scar near his right eyebrow, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. "I don't want to bring danger to your door," she said finally. "You've already risked too much." Lucas shook his head. "Blackwell and I were bound to clash eventually. Man's been trying to buy up all the small ranches in the area, mine included. I've just been giving him a reason to leave me be." He looked at her directly. "The question is, what do you want, Miss Eastman?" It was a question no one had asked her in a very long time. What did she want? Not Harrison, certainly, not the suffocating life her father had planned for her, but beyond that, "I want." She began hesitantly. "I want to be free to make my own choices. To never again feel a man's hand raised against me in anger." Lucas nodded, his expression solemn. "Then that's what you'll have, for as long as you're under my protection." He paused, then added quietly, "And it's Lucas. No need for formalities after what we've been through tonight." Lucy smiled, feeling something warm and unfamiliar blooming in her chest. "Lucas," she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her lips. "And I'm Lucy, not Miss Eastman." They fell into a companionable silence, the dangers of the night temporarily held at bay by the small circle of warmth they'd created. Lucy knew that morning would bring new challenges. Harrison would not give up his pursuit, and her future remained uncertain. But for now, in this moment, with this unexpected protector at her side, she felt something she hadn't experienced in far too long: hope. Dawn broke crisp and clear, with a pale golden light that made the dew-covered grass shimmer. Lucy awoke to the soft sounds of Lucas tending the horses, his movements quiet and efficient. Despite the hard ground and the lingering fear, she had slept more soundly than she had in weeks. "Morning," Lucas greeted her, offering a canteen. "We should reach my place by midday if we make good time." Lucy drank deeply, the cool water reviving her. As she helped Lucas break camp, she was acutely aware of how different this morning could have been. By now, she would have been preparing for her wedding, surrounded by women who would dress her like a doll and deliver her to Harrison's waiting hands. Instead, here she was, miles from Silver Creek, her hair wild around her shoulders and her fine dress torn and dirty, riding alongside a man she barely knew but somehow trusted with her life. They set off as the sun climbed higher, Lucas leading them through terrain that grew increasingly rugged and beautiful. Rolling hills gave way to stands of pine and aspen, with glimpses of snow-capped mountains in the distance. Lucy found herself breathing more easily with each mile that separated them from Harrison and Silver Creek. "It's beautiful out here," she remarked, as they paused to rest the horses beside a clear, bubbling stream. Lucas nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon with the habitual vigilance of someone accustomed to living on the frontier. "That's why I stayed after." He trailed off, something shadowing his expression. Lucy waited, sensing there was more he wanted to say. "After the war," he continued finally, "I couldn't go back east, too many ghosts. Came out here with what little I had left and started over." He gestured toward the distant mountains. "Land's hard, but it's honest. Doesn't care who you were before." Lucy understood the appeal. "A fresh start," she murmured. "That's what I need, too." Lucas studied her thoughtfully. "What would you have done if you hadn't needed to run last night?" The question caught Lucy off guard. She'd been so focused on escaping Harrison that she hadn't thought beyond the immediate danger. "I don't know," she admitted. "Before Harrison, I taught at the schoolhouse in Silver Creek. I enjoyed it, but my father—" She sighed. "When our family fortunes declined, he saw my marriage as the solution. A woman with no money and no husband has few options out here. You're educated then?" Lucas asked, sounding genuinely interested. Lucy nodded. "My mother insisted before she passed, said a woman's mind was her true dowry." A sad smile crossed her face. "I'm not sure she intended me to use that dowry to flee across the Montana territory, but I like to think she'd approve." "Sounds like a wise woman," Lucas said, remounting his horse. "Come on. Not much farther now." They rode in companionable silence for another hour before cresting a hill that revealed a small valley below. Nestled against the base of a rocky ridge was a modest ranch house with several outbuildings, a corral, and a small herd of cattle grazing in the distance. "Triple M Ranch," Lucas announced, a hint of pride in his voice. "It's not much compared to Blackwell's spread, but it's mine, free and clear." Lucy took in the scene, the smoke curling from the chimney, the weathered but well-maintained buildings, the backdrop of mountains that seemed to cradle the property in their protective embrace. It looked like a painting of frontier life, rugged but beautiful in its simplicity. "It's wonderful," she said sincerely, and was rewarded with a rare, full smile from Lucas that transformed his serious face. As they approached, a figure emerged from the barn, a tall, lean man with graying hair who raised a hand in greeting. "That's Micah," Lucas explained. "My foreman." The though that's a fancy title for the only other full-time hand I can afford. Good man. Served with me during the war. Lucy felt a flutter of anxiety. What would this stranger think of her sudden appearance? Would he judge her for fleeing her betrothal? Her concerns were quickly allayed. Micah greeted Lucas with a firm handshake and a raised eyebrow at his unexpected companion, but showed no surprise when Lucas briefly explained the situation. "Blackwell's been asking for trouble for years," Micah commented, helping Lucy dismount with gentle hands. "Welcome to Triple M, Miss Eastman. Any enemy of Blackwell's is a friend of ours." Inside, the ranch house was simple but comfortable, a large main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, and 2 bedrooms off to one side. Everything was neat and functional, with occasional touches, a colorful woven blanket, a shelf of well-worn books that suggested Lucas was more than just a hard-working rancher. "You'll take my room," Lucas said, showing her to the larger of the 2 bedrooms. "I'll bunk with Micah in the second room." Lucy started to protest, but Lucas held up a hand. "No arguments. You've been through enough. Get some rest, clean up if you like. We can talk more at supper." Left alone, Lucy sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the past 24 hours finally catching up with her. She allowed herself a few moments of quiet tears, not of fear or regret, but of relief and overwhelming gratitude. Then, practical as always, she set about making herself presentable with the resources at hand. Lucas had left a basin of water and a bar of simple soap. There was no mirror, but Lucy did her best to wash away the dirt of their journey and comb her tangled hair with her fingers. Her dress was beyond salvation, torn and stained with dirt and blood. As she was wondering what to do, a soft knock came at the door. "Miss Eastman," it was Micah's voice. "The boss asked me to bring you these. They belonged to his sister when she visited last summer. Might be a bit large, but cleaner than what you've got." Lucy opened the door to find Micah holding a bundle of women's clothing, a simple skirt, blouse, and undergarments. "Thank you," she said, taking the clothes gratefully. "And please call me Lucy." Micah nodded, his weathered face kind. "Supper in an hour, Lucy. Nothing fancy, but it's hot." The clothes were indeed a bit large, but Lucy managed to make them presentable. The simple act of changing into clean garments made her feel more human, more like herself again. By the time she emerged for supper, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Lucas looked up as she entered the main room, and something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, at the transformation. He had cleaned up as well, his dark hair still damp, wearing a fresh shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. "You look," he began, then seemed to think better of whatever he was going to say. "Better," he finished, somewhat awkwardly. Lucy felt an unexpected warmth in her cheeks. "Thank you for the clothes, and for everything else." Supper was simple but hearty: venison stew, fresh bread, and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. As they ate, Lucas and Micah discussed ranch business, occasionally including Lucy in the conversation in a way that made her feel less like an intruder and more like a welcome guest. After the meal, Micah excused himself to check on a pregnant heifer, leaving Lucy and Lucas alone by the fire. In the warm, flickering light, with a full stomach and the knowledge that she was, at least temporarily, safe, Lucy found herself studying her rescuer more carefully. Lucas Dawson was not classically handsome like Harrison, whose good looks had initially blinded Lucy to his true nature. Instead, Lucas had a face that told stories of hardship and survival, of quiet strength and hidden depths. His hands, calloused from ranch work, moved with a surprising grace as he cleaned his pistol, a task he seemed to perform from habit rather than immediate necessity. "You're staring," Lucas observed without looking up, though there was no reprimand in his tone. Lucy didn't bother to deny it. I'm trying to understand why you would risk so much for a stranger. Lucas set aside his gun, finally meeting her gaze. I told you. I've seen what men like Blackwell can do. There's more to it than that, Lucy pressed gently. Something in his expression, in the intensity with which he'd confronted Harrison, suggested a personal stake. Lucas was quiet for so long that Lucy thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. I had a sister, he said, Sarah, younger than me by 6 years. While I was away fighting, she married a man much like your Blackwell, wealthy, respected, and brutal behind closed doors. His hands clenched briefly. By the time I got home, it was too late. They said she fell down the stairs, but he shook his head. Her husband remarried within 6 months. Nothing I could prove, nothing I could do except watch him build a new life while my sister was in the ground. Lucy's heart ached for him. I'm so sorry, Lucas. He nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy but clearly uncomfortable with it. So you see, it wasn't entirely selfless what I did. Maybe I was trying to save Sarah through you. Then I'm grateful to her too, Lucy said softly, for giving you the heart to intervene when others would have looked away. A log shifted in the fire, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling around the corners of the house with a mournful sound that emphasized the warmth and safety within. What will you do now? Lucas asked, changing the subject. Blackwell won't give up easily. Lucy sighed, the momentary peace she'd found giving way to practicality. I have an aunt in Denver. She never approved of my father's methods or his ambitions for me. If I could reach her, she might take me in until I can find work. Lucas nodded slowly. Denver's a good distance. We'd need to be careful, avoid the main routes where Blackwell might have men watching. He paused. Or, Lucy prompted when he didn't continue. Lucas seemed to be choosing his words carefully. Or you could stay here, at least for a while. Triple M isn't much, but we get by. And Blackwell would think twice about coming onto my land with hostile intentions. He might be wealthy, but he's not stupid enough to start a range war. The offer hung between them, weighted with implications neither of them was ready to address. Lucy knew that a single woman living with a bachelor rancher would raise eyebrows, damage reputations. But the alternative, risking the dangerous journey to Denver, possibly leading Harrison right to her aunt's door, was equally troubling. I could earn my keep, she said thoughtfully. I can cook better than either you or Micah, I'd wager, and I'm good with figures. I could help with your accounts. Lucas smiled slightly. Are you saying my stew wasn't to your liking, Miss Eastman? Lucy returned his smile, grateful for the lightening of the mood. I'm saying that while I appreciate your hospitality, I won't be a charity case. If I stay, it will be as someone who contributes. Fair enough, Lucas agreed. Though I should warn you, the triple MTKS accounts are more red than black these days. Blackwell's not the only big rancher squeezing out the smaller spreads. The practical discussion of ranch finances and Lucy's potential role at Triple M carried them through the evening, each of them tacitly avoiding the more complex questions that their arrangement raised. By the time Lucy retired to Lucas's borrowed bedroom, a tentative plan had formed. She would stay for 2 weeks, helping where she could while they monitored Harrison's movements and determined whether a journey to Denver would be safe. As she settled into the unfamiliar bed, surrounded by the subtle scent of leather and pine that seemed to be Lucas's own, Lucy found herself thinking not of Harrison or the danger he posed, but of the quiet rancher who had risked everything to save her. There was something about Lucas Dawson that called to her a steadiness, an integrity that stood in stark contrast to Harrison's false charm. It was too soon for such thoughts, Lucy knew. She was still reeling from her escape, still processing the destruction of the future she'd reluctantly accepted. And yet, as she drifted towards sleep, it was Lucas's clear blue eyes and rare smile that followed her into dreams, not the terrors she'd left behind. The next morning, Lucy woke to the sounds of ranch life: roosters crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, the rhythmic chopping of wood. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings jarring after years of waking in her childhood bedroom. Then the events of the past 2 days came rushing back, and with them, a strange mixture of fear and freedom. She dressed quickly in the borrowed clothes and made her way to the kitchen, where she found Micah stoking the stove fire. "Morning, Miss Lucy," he greeted her. "Boss is out checking fence lines. Said to tell you to make yourself at home." "Thank you, Micah," she replied, rolling up her sleeves. "Would you mind if I took over breakfast? I meant what I said about earning my keep." Micah relinquished the kitchen with obvious relief, and Lucy set about familiarizing herself with the supplies. The pantry was basic but adequate: flour, sugar, coffee, bacon, and eggs from the chickens she'd heard earlier. By the time Lucas returned, she had a respectable meal prepared: fluffy biscuits, crisp bacon, and eggs cooked just until the yolks were still slightly soft. Lucas paused in the doorway, his expression one of pleasant surprise as he took in the scene: the set table, the steaming coffee, and Lucy with a strand of hair escaping her hasty bun as she transferred the last of the biscuits to a plate. "This is quite an improvement over Micah's usual fare," he commented, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "I heard that, boss," Micah called from outside, where he was washing up at the pump. "And I don't disagree." Breakfast passed pleasantly, with Lucy finding herself more at ease than she'd expected in the company of these 2 weathered cowboys. They ate with the hearty appreciation of men accustomed to hard physical labor and indifferent cooking, which made Lucy's modest efforts seem like a feast. "What are your plans for today?" Lucas asked as he finished his coffee. "I thought I might see to mending those shirts I spotted in your room," Lucy replied, "and perhaps do a proper inventory of the pantry, unless there's something more pressing." Lucas seemed about to protest the idea of her doing his mending, but then thought better of it. "Only if you've nothing better to do," he said instead. "But don't feel obliged to take on everything at once. You're still recovering from quite an ordeal." Lucy appreciated his concern, but was eager to keep busy. Idleness would only give her more time to worry about Harrison, to wonder if he was still searching for her, or if he'd already dispatched men to watch the roads to Denver. The day established a pattern that would continue in the days that followed. Lucy took charge of the household tasks that had clearly been neglected in the absence of a woman's touch. She cleaned, cooked, mended, and gradually brought a sense of hominess to the ranch house that had been lacking before. Lucas and Micah continued their daily work, riding out each morning to tend to the cattle and maintain the property. In the evenings, they would gather around the table for supper and conversation that grew increasingly comfortable as they learned more about one another. Lucy discovered that Lucas had been a captain in the Union Army, that he'd come west after the war with nothing but his horse and the clothes on his back, and that he'd built the Triple M from scratch over 6 years of backbreaking labor. Micah had been a sergeant under Lucas's command, had followed him west when his own family Pennsylvania farmers had no place for a son who returned from war changed in ways they couldn't understand. In turn, Lucas and Micah learned about Lucy's childhood in a once prosperous merchant family, her education at a ladies' seminary in St. Louis, and her brief, happy time as a schoolteacher before her father's financial troubles led to the arranged match with Harrison. "You miss teaching?" Lucas asked one evening as they sat on the porch, Watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple, Lucy nodded, her fingers busy with a piece of mending. Very much. There's something wonderful about seeing a child grasp a new idea, watching their world expand through knowledge. No school nearby, Lucas said thoughtfully. Nearest one's in Clearwater, 20 miles east. Some families around here, though. Children who get no formal learning at all. Lucy looked up, intrigued. Are there enough to justify a small school? Lucas shrugged. Maybe. Half-dozen families within riding distance. Another few up in the hills, trappers mostly, but with young ones who'll need schooling eventually. He glanced at her, just thinking aloud. But the idea had taken root in Lucy's mind. A purpose, a way to be useful beyond household tasks. A reason to stay that had nothing to do with her growing awareness of Lucas Dawson as a man, not just a rescuer. For as the days passed, Lucy found it increasingly difficult to maintain the emotional distance that prudence demanded. There was something about Lucas, his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness with injured animals, his dry humor that emerged more frequently as he grew comfortable with her presence, that drew her to him in ways she hadn't anticipated. She caught herself watching him as he worked in the yard, appreciating the fluid strength of his movements. She found herself looking forward to their evening conversations, to the moments when he would reveal another piece of himself, another layer beneath the reserved exterior. And sometimes, she caught him watching her too when he thought she was absorbed in a task, his blue eyes following her with an expression she wasn't yet brave enough to interpret. A week passed, then 10 days. There had been no sign of Harrison or his men, no word from Silver Creek. Lucy began to hope that perhaps he had given up, decided she wasn't worth the trouble after all. But Lucas remained vigilant, sending Micah into town occasionally for supplies and information. On the 12th day, Micah returned from such a trip with troubling news. "Blackwell's still looking," he reported as they gathered for supper. "Offering $100 now for information leading to Miss Lucy's whereabouts, and he's got men watching the road to Denver." Lucy's hands trembled slightly as she set down the stew pot. "He guessed I might head there." Lucas's expression was grim. "Not a difficult conclusion to reach. It's where most people from these parts go when they need a fresh start." He looked at Micah. "Anything else?" Micah hesitated, glancing at Lucy. "There's talk that he's filed kidnapping charges against you, boss." "Claims you took his fiancé against her will," Lucy gasped. "That's absurd. I went willingly, more than willingly." "Blackwell's got the law in his pocket," Lucas said, his voice controlled but with an underlying current of anger. "And your father's apparently backing his story, saying you were confused, manipulated." Lucy felt sick. "My own father. I knew he valued the match, but to lie like that." Lucas reached across the table, briefly covering her hand with his own, the first time he had deliberately touched her since helping her onto her horse that night at the stable. "It changes nothing. You're safe here, and you're welcome to stay as long as necessary." His touch, warm and calloused, sent a current through Lucy that momentarily displaced her fear. She met his eyes, finding in them a steadfastness that anchored her. "Thank you," she said softly, "but I can't let you risk arrest on my behalf." "Let me worry about that," Lucas replied, withdrawing his hand but maintaining eye contact. "I've faced worse than false accusations." That night, Lucy found sleep elusive. She paced the small confines of her borrowed bedroom, weighing options that all seemed to lead to further trouble. If she left for Denver, she risked capture by Harrison's men. If she stayed, she placed Lucas and the Triple M in jeopardy. And if she returned to Silver Creek to clear Lucas's name, she would be delivering herself directly into Harrison's hands. A soft tap at her door interrupted her troubled thoughts. She opened it to find Lucas standing there, looking as sleepless as she felt. "Heard you pacing," he said by way of explanation. "Thought you might want some company or at least some coffee." Lucy nodded gratefully, following him to the kitchen where a pot was already warming on the stove. They sat at the table, steam rising from their cups in the cool night air. "I can't stay," Lucy said finally, breaking the companionable silence. "Not if it means you might be arrested." Lucas sipped his coffee, his expression unreadable. "And I can't let you leave, not when Blackwell's men are watching every trail out of the territory. We're at an impasse then." "Not necessarily." Lucas set down his cup, his movements deliberate. "There's another option we haven't discussed." Lucy waited, sensing that whatever he was about to propose was significant. Lucas met her gaze directly. "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them, simple yet profound. Lucy stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" "Marry me," Lucas repeated, his voice steady though his eyes revealed a vulnerability he rarely displayed. "As my wife, you'd have legal protection that you lack as a single woman. Blackwell's kidnapping charges would be meaningless if you were my wife by choice. And," he hesitated, "and I would never treat you as he did. You would be safe, respected, free to establish that school you've been thinking about." Lucy's mind raced. A marriage of convenience, for that's what he was offering, was not uncommon on the frontier, where practical considerations often outweighed romantic ones. But was that all this was to Lucas? And was it all she wanted? "You barely know me," she said softly. "And I'm still running from one hasty engagement. Why would you tie yourself to someone with so much baggage, so much danger?" Lucas's gaze never wavered. "I know enough. I know you're brave, kind, and stronger than you realize. I know you've brought something to this house that's been missing since I built it." He paused. "And I know that the thought of you leaving sits like a stone in my chest." The last admission, so plainly stated, caused Lucy's breath to catch. There was more here than practicality, more than a simple solution to her predicament. "Is this? Are you?" Lucy struggled to frame the question she truly wanted to ask. Lucas seemed to understand. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I'm not offering out of pity or duty, Lucy. These past days, watching you make a place for yourself here, seeing your strength and your grace even in the face of everything that's happened, I find myself wanting more than just to protect you. I find myself wanting to build something with you." It wasn't a declaration of love, not yet, but it was honest, and in its honesty, more compelling than all of Harrison's elaborate courtship had ever been. Lucy looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between her pale fingers and his sun-darkened ones. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This isn't a decision to make in the middle of the night over coffee." Lucas nodded, gently releasing her hand. "Take all the time you need. The offer stands regardless of your answer." He stood, gathering their cups. "Try to get some rest." As he turned to go, Lucy called after him. "Lucas," he paused, looking back. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing me as someone worth building with, not just something to be possessed." A smile, warmer than any she'd seen from him before, softened his features. "That's the easiest part of all, Lucy Eastman." Sleep came more easily after that, though Lucy's dreams were a confusing tangle of white dresses, wedding rings, and blue eyes that saw too much and offered everything. Morning brought clarity, or at least the beginning of it. As Lucy helped prepare breakfast, she found herself observing Lucas with new eyes, considering him not just as her rescuer or host, but as a potential husband. She watched his interactions with Micah, noted the respect with which he treated his foreman despite their easy familiarity. She recalled how he had never once made her feel indebted for his help, how he had offered her choices at every turn. And she thought of Harrison, his possessiveness disguised as concern, his quick temper masked by charming apologies, the way he had made decisions for her own good. The contrast could not have been clearer. By midday, Lucy had made her decision, though she waited for the right moment to convey it. That opportunity came in the late afternoon, when she found Lucas alone in the barn, tending to a lame horse with the same gentle attention he seemed to afford all creatures in his care. "She'll heal," Lucy commented, nodding toward the mare. "With that kind of attention." Lucas glanced up, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Most things do, given enough care and patience." Lucy moved closer, gathering her courage. "I've been thinking about your proposal." Lucas straightened, giving her his full attention but saying nothing, allowing her the space to speak without pressure. "I have conditions," Lucy continued, her voice stronger now. "If I agree, I'm listening. First, I want a real marriage, not just a legal arrangement." Lucy met his gaze steadily. "I won't enter another relationship based on appearances." Something flickered in Lucas's eyes, surprise, followed by a warmth that made Lucy's heart quicken. "I wouldn't offer anything less," he said quietly. "Second," Lucy continued, "I want to establish that school we discussed, not just for my own fulfillment but because it's needed." Lucas nodded. "The old bunkhouse could be converted. It's sturdy, just needs some work." "And third." Lucy hesitated, this last condition the most difficult to articulate. "I need to know that you're choosing me for myself, not out of duty or pity, not as a replacement for the sister you couldn't save." Lucas was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he set down the brush he'd been using on the mare and closed the distance between them, stopping just short of touching her. "Lucy Eastman," he said, his voice low and earnest, "from the moment you stood up in that stable, bruised and terrified but still fighting, still determined to escape, I've admired you. Every day since then has only deepened that admiration." He took a breath. "I'm offering marriage because I believe we could build something good together, something true. And because the thought of you leaving makes me realize how empty this place, how empty I was before you arrived." It wasn't a grand declaration, but its very simplicity, its honesty, moved Lucy in ways that Harrison's elaborate compliments never had. She studied Lucas's face, finding in it an openness, a vulnerability that he rarely revealed. "Then yes," she said softly, "I'll marry you, Lucas Dawson." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the weight of their agreement settling between them. Then, slowly, Lucas raised his hand to her face, his thumb gently brushing the spot where Harrison's ring had cut her cheek, now healed to a faint line. "I promise you'll never wear another mark like this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not while I'm breathing." Lucy leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the tenderness of it. When she opened them, Lucas was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "May I kiss you?" he asked, the formal request at odds with the heat in his gaze. In answer, Lucy raised herself on tiptoes, closing the distance between them. Their lips met tentatively at first, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened as Lucas's arms came around her waist, drawing her closer. Lucy's hands found their way to his shoulders, then his neck, feeling the rapid beat of his pulse beneath her fingertips. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "If that's any indication," he murmured, "I'd say we'll manage a real marriage just fine." Lucy laughed, a sound of genuine happiness that echoed in the barn, startling the horses. "I'd say so, Mr. Dawson." They were married 3 days later, with Micah and the local circuit preacher as witnesses. The ceremony was simple, held in the main room of the ranch house with autumn sunlight streaming through the windows. Lucy wore a blue dress that Lucas had ridden 30 miles to purchase from the nearest town, insisting that she should have something new for the occasion, something that wasn't borrowed or associated with her flight from Harrison. As they spoke their vows, Lucy found herself believing in their sincerity in a way she never had during her engagement to Harrison. When Lucas promised to cherish and protect her, his eyes steady on hers, she knew with absolute certainty that he meant every word. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Lucas kissed her with a restrained passion that promised more to come. Micah cheered and produced a bottle of good whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion, and for a few perfect hours, the threat of Harrison Blackwell seemed distant and inconsequential. But reality would not be held at bay for long. That evening, as they prepared to retire to what was now their shared bedroom, Lucas broached the subject they had both been avoiding. "Blackwell will hear of our marriage eventually," he said, his voice deliberately casual as he stoked the fire for the night. "It might bring matters to a head." Lucy, brushing her hair at the small table that served as a dressing area, met his eyes in the reflection of the mirror he had installed as a wedding gift. "I know," she said quietly. "Part of me hopes he'll simply give up, decide I'm not worth the trouble, but I know Harrison better than that. His pride won't allow him to let this go unanswered." Lucas moved behind her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Triple M isn't Blackwell's grand estate, but it's defensible. And I've sent word to some friends from my Army days who have settled in the territory. They'll stand with us if needed." Lucy reached up to cover one of his hands with her own. "I never meant to bring a war to your doorstep." Lucas bent to press a kiss to the top of her head. "Our doorstep now. And some things are worth fighting for." He met her eyes in the mirror, the intensity of his gaze making her heart race. "You're worth fighting for, Lucy Dawson." The name, her new name, sent a shiver of pleasure through her. She turned in her seat to face him, reaching up to draw him down to her level. "As are you, husband," she whispered against his lips. What followed was a night of discovery and tenderness that banished, at least temporarily, all thoughts of Harrison Blackwell and the threat he posed. In Lucas's arms, Lucy found a passion and a sense of safety she had never known existed, each touch a revelation, each whispered endearment a promise kept. By morning, their marriage was well and truly consummated, and Lucy faced the new day with a quiet confidence that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would meet them not as the frightened woman who had hidden in a stable, but as Mrs. Lucas Dawson, secure in her husband's love and her own newfound strength. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm of their own. Lucas and Micah continued the daily work of the ranch, with Lucy establishing her place not just as a homemaker, but as a full partner in the enterprise. Her education proved valuable as she took over the account books, discovering ways to stretch their limited resources and identifying potential markets for the Triple MTK's modest cattle production. True to his word, Lucas helped her begin transforming the old bunkhouse into a schoolhouse. They rode together to visit neighboring ranches and homesteads, introducing Lucy as Lucas's wife and gauging interest in the school. The response was encouraging. 7 families, with a total of 12 children between the ages of 6 and 14. All eager for the education that had been unavailable in this remote area. "You've brought hope to people who'd given up on schooling for their children," Lucas commented as they rode home from one such visit. "That's no small thing." Lucy smiled, warmed by his praise and by the genuine enthusiasm she'd seen in the parents' faces. "It gives me purpose, beyond just being your wife, though I find I quite enjoy that role as well." Lucas's answering smile held a heat that still had the power to make her blush. Their marriage, begun as a solution to a problem, had quickly evolved into something neither of them had anticipated: a deep partnership based on mutual respect, and a passion that seemed to grow rather than diminish with each passing day. But the shadow of Harrison Blackwell remained. Micah's occasional trips to town always included gathering information, and the news was not encouraging. Harrison had indeed heard of Lucy's marriage and was beside himself with rage. The kidnapping charges against Lucas remained, with the local law in Silver Creek apparently willing to pursue them if Lucas ever set foot in town. More troublingly, Harrison had been making inquiries about the Triple M, its boundaries, and its water rights. Such interest from a man of his resources was never a good sign. "He's looking for leverage," Lucas observed grimly after Micah reported this latest development. "A way to pressure us legally, since he can't simply ride in and take you." Lucy's hand went instinctively to her abdomen, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by Lucas. They had not yet discussed the possibility of children, but both were well aware that their enthusiastic marriage made such an outcome likely sooner rather than later. "We need to end this," Lucy said firmly. "I won't live the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering when Harrison will strike, and I won't raise children under that shadow." Lucas studied her face, noting the determination that had replaced the fear he'd first seen in the stable. "What do you propose?" "I need to confront him," Lucy said simply. "On our terms, not his. Show him and anyone else who might support his claims that I chose to leave, that I chose you, and that no amount of money or influence will change that." Lucas's immediate instinct was to refuse, to protect her from any further contact with the man who had abused her. But he had promised her a real partnership, and that meant respecting her judgment, even when it ran counter to his protective instincts. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we do it carefully. We choose the place, the time, and we make damn sure it's public enough that he can't try anything without witnesses." Lucy nodded, relief evident in her face. She had clearly expected more resistance. "The Harvest Festival in Clearwater," she suggested. "It's in 3 weeks. Everyone from miles around will be there, including the territorial judge. Harrison won't risk acting openly with so many witnesses." Lucas considered this, then nodded. "It's a sound plan, but you won't face him alone, Lucy." "Not ever again." "I wouldn't want to," she assured him, moving to stand in the circle of his arms. "My strength comes from knowing you're beside me." As the day of the Harvest Festival approached, Lucy and Lucas prepared carefully. Word was sent to Harrison through a neutral third party, the preacher who had married them, that Lucy would be at the festival, and was willing to speak with him publicly, to resolve matters once and for all. No direct response came, but Micah's sources confirmed that Harrison had received the message and had reserved rooms at the hotel in Clearwater for the duration of the festival. The morning of the event dawned clear and cool, a perfect autumn day. Lucy dressed with particular care in the blue dress from her wedding, now altered slightly to fit her changing figure. Though they had not yet announced it publicly, she was certain she was carrying Lucas's child, a fact that filled her with both joy and renewed determination to end Harrison's threat permanently. "You look beautiful," Lucas said as he helped her into the wagon. He was dressed in his best as well, with a new shirt and his seldom-worn dress coat. "And you look very handsome, Mr. Dawson," Lucy replied with a smile that held just a hint of nerves. "Quite dashing enough to make all the ladies at the festival jealous of your wife." "Only one lady's opinion concerns me," Lucas said, lifting her hand to his lips in a gesture that still had the power to make her heart race. The ride to Clearwater was pleasant, with Lucy and Lucas discussing their plans for the school's opening the following month and their hopes for the future of the Triple M. They deliberately avoided mentioning Harrison or the confrontation to come, choosing instead to enjoy each other's company and the beauty of the autumn landscape. Clearwater was transformed for the Harvest Festival, with bunting decorating the main street and stalls selling everything from homemade pies to handcrafted furniture. Children ran between the displays, their laughter mingling with the music from a small band set up in the town square. Lucas helped Lucy down from the wagon, his hand lingering at her waist in a protective gesture that she found more reassuring than restrictive. Together, they made their way through the crowd, greeting neighbors and introducing themselves to those they hadn't yet met. Lucy was in the midst of discussing potential textbooks with the wife of a local merchant when she felt Lucas stiffen beside her. Following his gaze, she saw Harrison Blackwell making his way toward them, flanked by two men she recognized as his most loyal employees. "He's here," Lucas murmured, his voice calm despite the tension evident in his posture. Lucy took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Yes, and so are we together." Harrison stopped a few paces away, his handsome face set in lines of cold fury that might have once terrified Lucy, but now only strengthened her resolve. She noted with detached interest that he wore the same ring that had cut her cheek, its large stone glinting in the sunlight. "Lucy," he said, his voice carrying just the right note of concern for the benefit of those watching. "Thank God you're safe. I've been searching everywhere for you." Lucas's hand tightened slightly at her waist, but Lucy stepped forward, putting herself between the two men. "Hello, Harrison," she said, her voice clear and steady. "As you can see, I'm perfectly well, better than well, in fact." Harrison's gaze flickered to Lucas, then back to Lucy, his expression darkening. "This man took you against your will, Lucy. Your father and I have been sick with worry. But it's over now, you're safe, and you can come home." A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the tension radiating from the trio. Lucy was acutely aware of the watching eyes, the listening ears. This was exactly what she had wanted witnesses to the truth. "No one took me against my will, Harrison," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "I fled from you of my own accord after this." She touched the faint scar on her cheek, "and all the other bruises you gave me that weren't visible to others." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Harrison's face flushed with anger, but he maintained his composure, aware as Lucy was of their audience. "You're confused, darling," he said, his tone deliberately patient. "Whatever this man has told you, Lucas Dawson has told me nothing but the truth," Lucy interrupted, "and shown me nothing but respect and kindness. He offered me shelter when I had nowhere else to go, and later he offered me his name and his heart, which I accepted freely and gladly." She held up her left hand, where a simple gold band nothing like the ostentatious diamond Harrison had given her gleamed in the sunlight. "I am Mrs. Lucas Dawson now, legally and willingly. Whatever claim you thought you had on me is null and void." Harrison's careful mask slipped, revealing the rage beneath. "You think a hasty ceremony changes anything? Your father signed a contract for horses or cattle, perhaps," Lucas interjected, his voice level but with an underlying steel. "Not for a woman with her own mind and heart. Lucy isn't property to be bartered, Blackwell. She's my wife, and any man who raises a hand to her answers to me." The territorial judge, drawn by the commotion, stepped forward. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his authoritative presence causing Harrison's men to step back slightly. "No problem, Your Honor," Lucy said clearly. "Mr. Blackwell was just leaving. Our business is concluded." Harrison looked from Lucy to Lucas, then to the judge and the watching crowd. Something in his expression shifted, calculation replacing rage as he assessed his position. "This isn't over," he said softly, meant for Lucy's ears alone. "No woman makes a fool of Harrison Blackwell." "I didn't make you a fool, Harrison," Lucy replied evenly. "You managed that all on your own." For a moment, Harrison looked as if he might lunge at her, public setting be damned. But the watching crowd, the judge's presence, and Lucas's steady stance beside Lucy stayed his hand. With a final glare that promised retribution, he turned and strode away, his men following close behind. The tension that had held Lucy upright seemed to drain away all at once. She swayed slightly, and Lucas's arm came around her waist, supporting her. "You did it," he murmured against her hair. "You stood up to him, Lucy. I'm so damn proud of you." The judge approached them, curiosity evident in his weathered face. "Mrs. Dawson, is it? I gather there's quite a story here." Lucy straightened, drawing strength from Lucas's presence and from the knowledge that she had faced her worst fear and emerged victorious. "Yes, Your Honor. And if you have time, I'd be happy to share it with you, including the false kidnapping charges that Mr. Blackwell has filed against my husband." The judge's eyebrows rose, but he nodded thoughtfully. "I believe I would like to hear this story, perhaps over some of Mrs. Miller's award-winning apple pie." As they followed the judge to a quiet corner of the festival, Lucy felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Harrison might not have given up entirely, men like him rarely did, but she had taken his power away by confronting him publicly. By showing the world and herself that she was no longer the frightened woman who had hidden in a stable. She was Lucy Dawson, now wife, soon to be mother, teacher, and partner in all things to the man who had extended his hand when she needed it most, and said those simple words that had changed everything. "Stay with me." The confrontation at the Harvest Festival marked a turning point. Judge Wilson, after hearing Lucy's full story and examining the evidence, including the now faded bruises Harrison had left and statements from several women in Silver Creek who had witnessed his controlling behavior, dismissed the kidnapping charges against Lucas and issued a stern warning to Harrison about the consequences of further harassment. Harrison left Clearwater the same day, his fury evident but his options limited by the public nature of his defeat and the judge's involvement. Lucy and Lucas returned to the Triple M cautiously optimistic that the worst was behind them. The weeks that followed were busy ones. Lucy's school opened with 9 students initially, a number that quickly grew to 15 as word spread of the quality of her teaching. The converted bunkhouse rang with children's voices reciting lessons and singing songs, bringing a new kind of life to the Triple M. Lucas, watching his wife in her element, patient with struggling students, firm with troublemakers, and radiantly happy in her role, felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond his growing love for her. They were building something together, just as he had promised that night in the kitchen. Something lasting and meaningful, and they were building a family as well. Lucy's pregnancy, confirmed by the midwife who lived near Clearwater, progressed smoothly. By early winter, her condition was obvious even beneath the looser dresses she had begun to wear. The children at school treated her changing body with a mixture of curiosity and matter-of-fact acceptance, while the neighboring women brought gifts of baby clothes and practical advice. "Have you thought about names?" Lucas asked one snowy evening as they sat before the fire, Lucy's feet in his lap as he massaged them gently, easing the ache that came with a day of teaching and household work. Lucy smiled, her hand resting on her rounded abdomen where their child had just delivered a particularly energetic kick. "I was thinking Samuel for a boy after my grandfather. He was the one who encouraged my education, even when my father thought it impractical." Lucas nodded approvingly. "Samuel Dawson. It has a strong sound to it, and for a girl." Lucy hesitated, then said softly, I thought perhaps, Sarah, if you wouldn't mind, to honor your sister and to remember that good can come from tragedy if we're brave enough to reach for it." Lucas's hands stilled on her feet, and for a moment Lucy feared she had overstepped, touched a wound still too raw. But when he looked up, his eyes were shining with unshed tears and something that looked very much like wonder. "Sarah Dawson," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes, I'd like that very much." As winter settled over the Triple M, bringing with it short days and long, cozy evenings, Lucy and Lucas prepared for the arrival of their child. The second bedroom, which had once been Micah's before he moved to the new bunkhouse built for the growing number of ranch hands, was transformed into a nursery with a handcrafted cradle made by Lucas himself and a rocking chair that had been a gift from the students' families. Christmas came and went, celebrated with a simplicity that Lucy found far more meaningful than the elaborate festivities her father had insisted upon. The ranch hands, Micah, and several neighboring families gathered at the Triple M for a feast and gift exchange that left everyone with full bellies and hearts. As Lucy's time grew near, they received occasional news of Harrison Blackwell. He had returned to Silver Creek briefly, then departed for San Francisco, where he reportedly had business interests. Some said he was courting a banker's daughter there, already seeking to replace Lucy with another advantageous match. "You think he's truly given up?" Lucy asked Lucas as they prepared for bed one night in late January, a month before their child was due. Lucas considered the question seriously, knowing that his wife valued honesty above reassurance. "Men like Blackwell don't give up easily," he said finally, "but they do calculate their odds." With the judge aware of the situation and public opinion against him, he'd be a fool to pursue you directly. Lucy nodded, accepting this assessment. "I find I don't fear him as I once did," she admitted. "Whether he's given up or not, he no longer has power over me." Lucas drew her into his arms, careful of her advanced pregnancy. "That's because you took that power back, Lucy. You faced him, stood your ground. That kind of courage changes a person." She smiled against his chest, feeling their child move between them. "I had good reason to be brave." The night their daughter was born, a late February blizzard raged outside, blanketing the Triple M in snow and cutting them off temporarily from neighbors and town. Micah rode through the storm to fetch the midwife, an act of loyalty that Lucy would never forget, while Lucas remained by her side, his calm presence anchoring her through hours of labor. Sarah Micah Dawson entered the world with a lusty cry just as the storm began to abate, her timing as practical as her father's, her determination as fierce as her mother's. She had Lucas's blue eyes and a dusting of blonde hair that promised to darken to her father's rich brown. Holding his daughter for the first time, Lucas felt a protective love so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. This tiny being, this miracle born of danger and courage, of a woman's flight and a man's offer of sanctuary, represented everything he had never dared hope for after the war's darkness. "She's perfect," he whispered, carefully returning Sarah to Lucy's arms. "Just like her mother." Lucy smiled up at him, exhausted but radiant. "I think she has your stubbornness. Did you hear how loudly she announced her arrival?" Lucas laughed, the sound of pure joy filling the room that had once been so empty. "The Triple M has a new boss, I reckon." As spring returned to Montana, bringing with it new calves, fresh grass, and longer days for schooling, the Triple M flourished. Under Lucas and Micah's careful management, the herd grew, allowing them to hire additional hands and expand their operations. Lucy's school gained a reputation for excellence that drew families from even greater distances, some moving closer to the Triple M specifically for their children's education. And Sarah thrived, growing from a newborn to a curious infant who watched the world with her father's thoughtful blue eyes and reached for it with her mother's determined spirit. She became the center of a widening circle of love that included not just her parents, but Micah, who proved to be a surprisingly gentle uncle. The ranch hands who brought her small treasures from their travels, and the school children who considered her their special mascot. On a warm day in late May, as Lucy sat on the porch with Sarah nursing contentedly at her breast, a rider approached the Triple M, a stranger on a fine horse, moving with the confidence of someone used to commanding respect. Lucy tensed momentarily, old fears surfacing despite the peaceful months that had passed. But as the rider drew closer, she saw it was not Harrison but an older man, well-dressed but travel-worn. Lucas emerged from the barn, alerted by the dogs barking, and moved to intercept the visitor. Lucy watched their exchange, noting her husband's initial wariness giving way to surprise, then a cautious welcome as he gestured toward the house. As they approached, Lucy adjusted her clothing to cover herself and Sarah, who had fallen asleep at her breast. She stood to greet the visitor, curious about the man who had prompted such an unexpected reaction from Lucas. "Lucy," Lucas said, his voice carefully neutral, "this is Gerald Eastman, your father." Lucy froze, staring at the man she hadn't seen since fleeing Silver Creek more than a year earlier. He looked older, the lines in his face deeper, his once proud posture slightly stooped, but it was the expression in his eyes that caught her attention, a mixture of uncertainty, regret, and something that might have been hope. "Father," she said, her voice cool but not hostile, "this is unexpected." Gerald Eastman removed his hat, twisting it in his hands, a nervous gesture Lucy remembered from childhood before ambition had hardened him. "Lucy," he said, his voice rough with emotion, You look well." "I am well," she replied simply. "Very well, in fact." She glanced down at Sarah, still sleeping peacefully against her shoulder, then back at her father. "This is your granddaughter, Sarah." Gerald's eyes widened, filling with tears he made no effort to hide. "May I? Would you permit me to see her?" Lucy hesitated, looking to Lucas. His face was guarded, but he gave a small nod, deferring to her judgment. This was her father, her past to reconcile or reject as she saw fit. After a moment's consideration, Lucy nodded. "You may see her, yes. Whether you come to know her depends on what you have to say for yourself." Gerald approached slowly, as if afraid she might change her mind. When he looked down at Sarah's sleeping face, something in his expression broke open, revealing the father Lucy had known before money troubles and social ambition had changed him. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She has your mother's chin." The observation, so unexpected and so personal, momentarily disarmed Lucy. "Would you like to sit, Father? It's a long ride from Silver Creek." They settled on the porch, Lucas standing protectively nearby but giving Lucy space to handle this reunion in her own way. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by Sarah's soft baby breaths and the distant sounds of ranch work. "I owe you an apology, Lucy," Gerald finally said, his voice steadier now. "Many apologies, in fact, for arranging a match that brought you nothing but pain. For refusing to see what kind of man Blackwell truly was, for supporting his lies when you fled." He looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "And most of all, for failing to be the father you deserved." Lucy had imagined this moment many times over the past year, sometimes with anger, sometimes with sadness, occasionally with a hope she'd been afraid to acknowledge. But the reality of her father's contrition, his evident regret, was more affecting than she had anticipated. "Why now?" she asked, needing to understand before she could consider forgiveness. "It's been more than a year," Gerald sighed heavily. "Pride, stubbornness, fear of admitting how terribly wrong I'd been." He glanced at Lucas. and more recently because I wasn't sure I'd be welcome. What changed? Lucas asked, speaking for the first time since the introductions. Harrison Blackwell returned to Silver Creek last month, Gerald replied, his expression darkening. With a new wife from San Francisco, a banker's daughter, barely 20. Within a week, she was seen with bruises she couldn't explain. Within 2, her father arrived from California and removed her from Blackwell's house. Lucy gasped softly, instinctively holding Sarah closer. That poor girl. Gerald nodded grimly. It was like seeing your future as it might have been, Lucy, a future I had tried to sell you into. His voice broke. I couldn't live with myself any longer without at least trying to ask your forgiveness. Lucy was silent for a long moment, processing all she had heard, all she was feeling. There was anger still. Yes, for the betrayal, the year of separation, the support he had given Harrison even knowing what kind of man he was. But there was also an unexpected compassion for this diminished man who had finally recognized his failures. I don't know if I can forgive everything yet, she said honestly, but I'm willing to try, for Sarah's sake and for my own. Gerald's relief was palpable. That's more than I deserve and all I could hope for. Lucas moved to stand behind Lucy's chair, one hand coming to rest supportively on her shoulder. You're welcome to stay for supper, Mr. Eastman, he said, his tone making it clear that this tentative peace would proceed on his and Lucy's terms, and to meet your granddaughter properly. Beyond that, we'll take things as they come. Gerald accepted this conditional welcome with a humility that impressed even Lucas. Over supper, prepared by Lucy with help from Micah, who viewed Gerald with unconcealed suspicion, they began the slow work of rebuilding bridges that had seemed irrevocably burned. Gerald spoke of Silver Creek, of the changes since Lucy's departure. Harrison Blackwell had lost standing in the community after the incident with his new wife, whose father had powerful connections that even Harrison couldn't ignore. There was talk that he might sell his holdings and move permanently to San Francisco, where his less savory activities were not yet widely known. In turn, Lucy shared stories of the Triple M, of her school, and of the community they had built. She spoke of her students' progress, of the ranch's expansion, and of the future they envisioned, a future that now included a small daughter who might someday have siblings to join her in this life of freedom and purpose. As the evening drew to a close, with Gerald preparing to ride to Clearwater where he had taken a room at the hotel, Lucy found herself asking the question that had lingered beneath the surface of their conversation. Will you return to Silver Creek, Father? Or? Gerald seemed to understand the unspoken invitation. I've been thinking of making a change, he said carefully. Silver Creek holds too many reminders of my mistakes. I hear Clearwater is growing, might need someone with experience in mercantile business. Lucas and Lucy exchanged a glance, a silent communication born of months of partnership. Then Lucas nodded slightly, and Lucy turned back to her father. Clearwater is close enough for regular visits, she said. Sarah should know her grandfather. And perhaps, in time, we could all come to know each other better. It was not instant forgiveness, not a fairy tale reconciliation, but it was a beginning, another unexpected gift born from that desperate night when a frightened woman had hidden in a stable, and a quiet cowboy had offered his hand and said, "Stay with me." That night, with Sarah sleeping soundly in her cradle and the house settled into peaceful silence, Lucy and Lucas lay together in the darkness, her head pillowed on his chest, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "Are you all right?" Lucas asked softly. "Today couldn't have been easy." Lucy considered the question, taking stock of her feelings with the honesty that had become the foundation of their marriage. "I'm hopeful," she said finally. "Not entirely healed, but healing, It helps to see that he's genuinely changed. Lucas pressed a kiss to her forehead. You have a generous heart, Lucy Dawson. It's one of the many things I love about you. Lucy smiled in the darkness, still moved by his declarations of love even after months of marriage. Do you think we're doing the right thing, allowing him back into our lives, into Sarah's life? I think we're doing the right thing by giving him a chance to earn his place, Lucas replied thoughtfully. People can change. Lord knows we've both changed since that night in the stable. Lucy raised herself on one elbow, looking down at her husband's face, faintly visible in the moonlight streaming through their window. For the better, I hope. Lucas reached up, tracing the curve of her cheek where the scar from Harrison's ring had faded to near invisibility. You were always brave, Lucy. You just needed to remember it. His hand moved to cup her face tenderly. As for me, you taught me how to hope again, to build something beyond mere survival. Lucy leaned into his touch, overwhelmed by gratitude for this man who had risked everything to help a stranger and gained a family in return. Stay with me, she whispered, echoing his words from that fateful night, now a promise renewed between them. Always, Lucas replied, drawing her down for a kiss that held all the tenderness of their beginning and all the passion of their continuing journey. Always and forever. Outside, the Montana night wrapped around the Triple M Ranch, around the school that would educate generations of children, around the growing herd that would ensure the ranch's prosperity, around the house that had transformed from a bachelor's Spartan dwelling to a true home. And at its heart, in the room where a cowboy and the woman he had saved now held each other close, love continued to grow from the most unlikely of beginnings. For Lucy and Lucas Dawson, that terrible night of flight and fear had become the first chapter in a story that would span decades, a story of family, of community, of a love built on respect and partnership. A story that began with a desperate hiding place, a helping hand, and 5 simple words. Stay with me. And she had stayed, not out of fear or necessity, but out of choice, out of love. And in that staying, both had found what they truly sought, not just safety or sanctuary, but home.